Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, we're tackling one of the most expensive and underestimated problems in modern organizations, the communication gap between technical professionals and non-technical leaders. And I'm joined by Ken Little, who's a SVP of Engineering, to explore where engineers most often struggle with non-technical audiences, how to make complex ideas understandable to business-minded leaders so they can make better decisions, and what happens when that translation breaks down. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Ken.
Hi, Neil. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So, first question then. Where do technical professionals most often struggle when communicating with non-technical audiences?
Well, I think whether you're speaking to technical audiences or not, um, the first thing to remember is that most people are not going to remember the facts of anything that you try to present to them in a talk or through a presentation. That really you're trying to um, convey the general outline of an idea. You're really trying to convey an emotion, really trying to help guide them toward a direction of thinking rather than cramming a bunch of very specific information into their head. And I think that when technical folks start to try to talk to non-technical people or people who might not have the technical background that they do, they may even tend to go farther than they would otherwise to try to give a lot of background, to try to give a lot of context to the technical aspect of what it is they're discussing, when really the audience is probably most likely looking for the impact of the topic, the impact of the decision you're trying to make, the impact of on the business of whatever it is that you're actually trying to discuss, rather than the technical underpinnings.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, Ken. And I know that was definitely the case for myself. I had to give presentations in on project status for on a monthly basis for these decision makers, CTO, CMO, CEO, most of them non-technical, with the exception of the CTO, I suppose. But then even in that with that person, the group that I was in was very new to the company, so even he wasn't the sharpest on what we were doing in our group. And I would try to give all this background and all this context, and I get a whole lot more questions than I thought I would have afterwards. It's like, man, I gave you all this background, and yet if I'd spoken less, you might have even had less questions.
Yeah, answers beget questions. That's true.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. All right. So, what's different about communicating with business-minded leaders versus peers in engineering?
Um, I think it's important to remember how people, like, what other people are bringing into the room and what they are, expecting from you, and what they're sort of projecting onto you whenever you're speaking, because that can color um, what they hear and what they're expecting you to talk about and cover. And so, I guess, like, folks who might not have a technical background, um, they may, assume that you're coming with a certain amount obviously you're coming with technical expertise, but they might not know whether or not you actually understand the business context in which you're working in, right? Because that's not a thing that's necessarily a given across all technical leaders or even expected across all technical leaders. But typically, especially if you're walking and talking to leaders of the company, if you're talking to C-suites or VPs, that's the context that they're looking for. They kind of want to understand, first and foremost, do you even know what problem we're trying to solve here? And so if you can kind of get that set and frame your discussion in those terms, then I think it opens up the rest of your communication. And obviously, if you're trying to, do something a bit more technical with your team, you don't have to do that. But it's very important to make that shift, I think, if you're going to go talk to leaders about what you're trying to accomplish from a technical perspective.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely, well, I don't think you're right. I know you're right because I look back on my time working as an engineer, and Ken, every other week, money ended up in my bank account, but I never thought about why or where it came from. I just knew it was there, and it was there on a regular basis, and that's all I was thinking about. And I think a lot of us technical people, I think, are kind of like myself, and we're thinking about, well, they hired us to do this technical work. They didn't hire us to know about business impact. But if you want to be effective in your role, especially if you're speaking to these decision makers, they are very much in tune to the business impact because that's what keeps all of us having jobs. And, and that's another thing I never thought about really is,
Mm,
well, I mean, if we don't sell stuff, then we're all out of jobs. And you could be all enamored with this widget all you want, but I mean, if that money ended up in that bank account, well, I guess I'm updating my LinkedIn profile.
yeah.
Yeah, that's where I was. Okay, so then when you need to explain a technically complex issue to a business leader, what do you focus on first?
Um, so, I think, typically whenever you're in a room and you're talking to a business leader, uh, they're not trying to help you make a technical decision. And so really what they want to know, um, and typically what you're trying to do is ask for resources of some kind, right? You're asking for more capital so that you can hire another developer or hire a contractor. You're asking for time, right? Which is the same thing, right? You're asking for time. So can we do this? First, can we sequence our work this way? Knowing that it's going to put off, say, to your point, like bringing a product to market for a bit of time, which is going to cost the company money. And you're asking for um, a trade-off. Like you might not recognize that that's, it's important to recognize that's what you're doing. You're walking into that room and the audience that you're talking to as they're weighing whatever it is that you're trying to present, be it like, hey, I need some more money or I need time for this, they're weighing it against the trade-offs for that the other leaders are actually asking them for too. Can we get this thing to market faster? Our competitors like feel ahead of us. We need to actually get this done so we can get into our marketing campaign that's actually going to launch in 3 months, and we have to have that creative done right now. They're actually balancing all that in their heads and make sure. I think it's important to know what that is. Like, what is it that you think the leaders are actually balancing your topic against, so that you can come in prepared to talk about your work in that context, and you can acknowledge that, hey, yeah, I recognize this is going to put us off for a quarter, but let me tell you why I think that that's important. I recognize that, you could do something else with this extra 250K, but if you put it into developer, here's what we're going to get, so that you can actually bring, context to the decision rather than just sort of outlaying like whatever the technical issue is.
You know, I'm laughing in my head when you were talking, Ken, because it reminded me of these presentations I had to give in front of management. And there'd be so many instances in which we'd be given a project and says and be told this needs to be ready by this conference. With and it's just like, well, you have no clue what has to go into making this happen. So how can you tell us that this has to be done by this date? And then, man, there'd be times we have to go into these meetings and tell them, well, we're not going to hit that deadline. We're not, we're not even going to lie to you and try to tell you that
Yeah,
we're never close.
and ideally, you can go in and you can talk about what it means. Like, something is usually shiftable. The definition of done is shiftable, right? The date is shiftable. The amount of resources is shiftable. The I think the trick is to walk in and try to know how you can how you can have answers for whichever way you're feeling the softness, because usually people, I mean, we're trying to square the circle here. We're trying to solve these business problems that, like, they're work. It's work to actually figure out how to get what you want to get done in the time you have with the money you have to do it. It's never easy, but that's why we're here. And so, figuring out which dimension people have a bit more play and can help you solve those problems and not feel so locked in
Yeah.
when you get caught in those corners.
Again, I'm laughing in my head when you talked about the definition of done. I remember I had a boss, and it would be so often where he'd come to us and says, "Oh yeah, we're done. All we have to do is X, Y, and Z." And so we're not done then. Is what you're saying? No, we're done. We're done. We're 80% done. Like, what the hell's 80%, man? We ain't done. What you're telling me? Okay, all right. Great conversation. Wonderful. Okay. So then, how can engineers reframe technical decisions in terms that help business leaders make better decisions?
Yeah. Um, Finding a way to bring it back. I mean, so in my business, so my work is typically consumer facing, right? So either it's B2B where I'm actually, building out some software for an external admin, or it's, B2B2C where we're working through customers, our customers, companies to, provide software for their employees or their contractors, that sort of thing. And typically, uh, I try pretty hard to make sure that we're talking about the impact of the customer, the impact of the customer experience, how, and that can take on a number of forms. But always trying to bring it back to something that's sort of grounded in reality and not necessarily stuck in the machine. They're for the work that we do, it's a lot of work goes into making sure that we have done the background work to understand the workflows that we're trying to optimize for our customers and for the employees of our customers as a payroll product. And so, we start there. Why do we think that we know what the context is, what the mindset of the customer is, what work have we done to lead that up front, and then to try to overlay the outline of why the technical approach that we're bringing to a problem will actually impact our customers' lives in a positive way. And obviously, I think there's a lot of work that can be done here if you have a strong partnership with design, to make sure that you're telling a visual story, and not just a technical one. Like people get a little glassy-eyed if you put up, say, a database schema, but if you put up an interaction model that shows how your data objects actually, connect and engage with each other, then you'll have a more connected audience and you'll have something that's more grounded, especially for leadership and things that they're gonna like feel emotionally connected to. You're always looking for that emotional connection. I think that like as technologists, we can be a little connected to the solution itself. And that doesn't necessarily propagate outside of of our sphere. And so you got to make sure you know what your audience is emotionally connected to and bring it back to that.
When you talk about emotional connection, Ken, it makes me think about storytelling. And I know
Yeah.
when I first started giving presentations, I didn't think stories had anything to do with any kind of presentation I had to give. I'm here for project status, man. Just, you know, I need money. I need time. I need stuff. Just give it to me,
Yeah.
damn it. The idea of storytelling, I think, is really important too. I'm based here in San Diego, a large biotech hub, and they often have pitch competitions here, and it's a lot of technical founders who are the ones giving the pitches, and the people who tend to win are the ones who are able to build that emotional connection and tell those stories, and the ones who just want us to stick to the technical specifications and the features, and they don't typically fare as well. So I definitely take your point about the importance of emotional connection.
Yeah. And I think about this too for it, the kind of talks or presentations that I personally like to give. Um, I learned from my time at Etsy with John Ospaw and Kellen Elliott McRae, who, the kinds of presentation, even technical talks that we were giving, that they were giving, on the world that we were giving to each other. Um, it wasn't based on dense slides. It was almost like a meme talk, right? Where really what you're trying to do is to, technical or some folks without technical backgrounds, you're just trying to get them into the emotional space to understand the problem you're trying to solve and why it's important and how you're trying to solve it, and sprinkling in just enough technical data to keep them hooked into that narrative and to keep them in the context you're trying to bring them into. Um, it's very different than trying to say put up a really dense slide that has a table like this tabular data you expect people to consume in 60 seconds while you're talking over it.
Man, Ken, you don't know how many times I've been to conferences, and I have to sit in the front because my eyesight ain't the best anymore. So I'm there, and most of the people who are giving presentations, they'll hit you with those slides with they're chock full of tables and charts and graphs, and I'm looking at them. There's a whole bunch of them on the screen, and I'm just thinking to myself, which one am I supposed to be looking at any given time? It's just like I just think as technical people, we just don't think. too much about that at the time. We just figure we need to have all this information because this conveys everything that we want to convey, which actually leads really nicely to this next question. How do you balance accuracy and nuance with clarity and brevity when the stakes are high?
What a question. Um, Accuracy and nuance for clarity and brevity. So I think the way that I would like, think about that question is um, what information, typically whenever you're giving a talk and you have a deck or a presentation that's going along with it, you do feel this need to cram all this data into it because for a lot of times, especially if you're talking to your leadership, that's going to be a takeaway. They're going to have that asset. You're going to hand them the deck, you're going to send them the deck. It's going to be an asset that you're expecting to go back and reference. And that may be the place, where you're just putting all this really accurate, detailed, fine-grained information into it because you're thinking about not necessarily like when you're speaking to them, you're thinking about what they're supposed to do with the asset after you leave the room. And I think it's okay, that to give yourself permission to have multiple assets, right? It can be in a presentation, it can be in a memo, it can be whatever format makes sense for your leadership, but you can have the one that you say, hey, here's the takeaway. It's going to have a lot more detail that we're going to cover, in the discussion. But you can reference this, and if you have questions about this one, like let me know, and then talk through something that is way more boiled down. Then even maybe have callbacks to the other, but it's okay to have multiple assets. And the one that you're speaking through, again, like it doesn't take much these days for people to zone out and miss a piece of very nuanced information. So you don't want to talk to nuance. You want nuance to be something that you hand out that you can reference later. You want your speaking to be that narrative, to be that thing that's going to move them and say, wait a minute, I actually want to go remember more about this. Let me go look at the detail page. Just sort of split it up, don't feel like you have to cram it all into one moment or one asset.
That makes perfect sense. And I fully agree with you, Ken. I mean, there's only so much someone can take in during a technical presentation or any presentation, really.
Yeah.
But if you offer them something that they consume at their own leisure and their own time later, well, yeah, I think that's a lot better than cramming a whole bunch of information into a presentation and thinking that they can consume all of it in the
Yeah.
moment. Because I mean, you know what's so crazy about that, Ken, is it's like as a technical person, even, can you do that? Have you
No.
ever been in a
Yeah.
presentation where someone's supposed to hit you with everything and you just consume all of it? Oh yeah, 100%, I get it. It's
Yeah.
like no, it's like
Yeah.
no,
I
but
just,
yet,
yeah.
but we
I'm
do
like,
it.
okay, well, I have to go learn that. I have to go figure that out after this talk because I'm not going to absorb it right now. I,
Yeah,
you know, I, I think it's hard to remember that, and I know that we're sort of time. I'm assuming, look, a lot of the talks that I give, or this, whenever I'm speaking, I obviously have a presentation to go with it. And it's a, the thing that I have to remind myself of constantly is that the presentation is to support me, that I'm the focus. What I'm saying is the focus. I want people listening to what I'm saying, and I want that supported by whatever it is that I've presented with them. I don't want to compete. I don't want to competing with me for attention. I don't want them reading a dense slide and not listening to me. I want them listening to me and having that like, reinforced by one or two key points that are being presented. And as long as you remember that like the presentation is there to support you as the speaker, you're not there to support the presentation, then you can build a relationship and you can build something with that content that makes sense
yeah.
and works for you.
You're 100% correct on that, Ken. And I think also for a lot of us technical people, at least for myself, I can speak for myself. Getting up in front of people isn't something that a lot of us like to do. And so we're going to have a whole bunch of stuff on the slide so we can read it
Yeah.
to make sure that we hit everything we wanted to hit. But when we do that, well, you're hitting people with way too much information that they can understand. But then another issue I think a lot of us have is we're not looking at people. So when we
Right.
don't look at people, they tend not to look at us. And if we were to actually look up from those slides that we've been reading and look at the people, you'll see what they're doing. And likely they're on their phone. They may be falling asleep. They may be staring off into space. They may be doing a whole bunch of things other than
Yeah.
listening to what you're trying to convey.
Yeah. I mean, if you can, look, I think it took a lot of practice. Just suffering through, public speaking for me to become even moderately comfortable with it. I would say it still makes me anxious, but I'm able to actually do it and execute it better now. But especially if you're in a context where you're talking to the leadership of a company, you have a room of 12, 15 people. If you can imagine, and even though it's a one-sided conversation, it is a conversation. And when you're having a conversation with people, you are looking at them. You are engaging with them, and they can give you nonverbal clues to tell you, like, you going too slow? Are you going too fast? How do you need to, what do you need to do? And it's important. It's definitely important to look around at the audience, even though it is harder than it sounds for a lot of people to do that because it is a form of engagement, that can be stressful.
Absolutely. And in fact, this is something that I often tell people, even just as it relates to myself. I was a member of Toastmasters for a number of years, and I remember a Toastmaster telling me, when you're giving a presentation, you need to look someone in the eye for 3 seconds before you move on to the next person. You
Oh
have
wow.
no you have no clue how long 3 seconds is until you look someone in the eye for 3 seconds. It seems like an eternity. And I was just like, I can't be doing this, man, because when I look people in the eye that long, I forget what I'm about to say
Yeah.
next. And then as I'm just stumbling, and these people are just like, what's this guy talking about? So the hack that I ended up using, especially if you're on an elevated stage and people can't tell, is you look at their eyebrows instead. Or you can
Right.
even look at their forehead. They can't tell the difference. And at least for me, it's
Right.
not as distracting as looking in someone's eyeballs.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good hack. 3 seconds sounds like a very long time.
Oh,
So I'm with you. You have to figure some way to make that a little more, palatable, I guess.
100%. So what would you say are the consequences of technical people and non-technical people not understanding each other when a technical person gives a presentation?
Um, I mean, I think that I mean, they're so you want typically whenever you're trying to speak to someone, you're doing it for a purpose, right? You're trying to help them understand a hardship. You're trying to help them understand an opportunity that you see, and you're seeing a path. Like typically when you're talking technically, you're solutioning. You're talking about a particular solution, and solutions are exciting, but opportunities are even better. And so, you can come away, if you're too focused in on the solution, if you're too focused in on the technical orientation of it, um, then you can walk away feeling unheard. It can feel like there's a major disconnect between leadership and the technical arm of an organization. You can start to, organizations can start to build up what they believe are helpful intermediaries from between like leadership and the tech org. And I think that in all scenarios, the less intermediary you can have, just for the sake of translation, just because someone's actually a little better at crafting the message. It's not that you've got the information, you've got the strategy, you see the problem, but you need someone to craft that message because you're not well practiced at crafting the message. You have to have an intermediary. Then something's going to get lost in translation. Now you're playing telephone. And so, you want to make sure that, like, I think it's very important for engineers and technical folks to learn how to speak to leaders the way that you're encouraging them to, so that they don't get, disintermediated. And so, like, or intermediated, and so, like, um, the stronger that direct connection is, I think the more potent the message will be, and the more able you'll be able to shift the direction of a company, the way that you think it needs to go.
Again, I've been laughing in my head a number of times during our conversation, Ken, because this now reminds me of a conference that I attended 2 summers ago. And it was technical people in the audience. It's a technical conference. And one of the presentations was given by a business development person. And after the presentation, that person got a whole lot of technical questions he could not answer. And I felt really bad for him. But luckily, there were two engineers from his company who were in the audience with me, just seated. And they were answering the questions from their seats. The room was small enough so that all of us could
Oh
hear
wow.
them. Yeah, right. And I just remember thinking at the time, why didn't one of them give the presentation? It's all engineers in the audience. They're not going to have business questions. They're going to have technical questions. And here's this poor business guy trying to field them, and he just can't. I mean, I just think if those technical people, those engineers were just more comfortable being that person in the front, well, we all would have benefited. And I think a lot of us we just don't think about that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important though. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what do you think an organization can do to help their technical people become those people that can speak or communicate well, so they don't need those translators?
Get them to do it. There's you know you cannot be good at something you're not willing to be bad at, and um, public speaking is just a really hard thing to feel safe being bad at, especially whenever your comparison is a CEO or someone like that who's is just so practiced. And you don't even you can't get into those roles if you don't sort of suffer through the learning curve of how to sway people with speech. And so, knowing that you're not going to be that good for a while as the people that you're probably, presenting against just doesn't matter. You have to make room for them to speak at all hands, make room for them to speak at leadership meetings and sort of find a way to help them through that learning curve. And I've been, so whenever I was at Etsy, one of the most helpful things that the company did, and I do think that like the leadership there really understood the value of of developing articulate technical leaders who were capable of speaking about more than just solutions. And so, it was a job requirement that you had to present at a conference or you had to write blog posts. And you had to be out there. You could not be insulated. You could not have silence as an option. And it got me out of my comfort zone. I had to learn how to do it because it was just like, okay, Ken, you're supposed to, this is like part of your job. It's like, go give a talk at a conference. Um, and for if they have the resources, engaging coaches, I think is super, super important, especially for technical leaders who can just feel a little like more insecure than other kinds of leaders may, in sort of knowing how to break down a topic, learning just the structure of how to give good public speaking, good public talks. Yeah, I think it's a thing that I've invested in myself and in my leaders, and I don't regret it. It pays dividends.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. When I think about it, Ken, I think for technical people, I don't ever tell them you need to love being in front of people speaking or communicating because I don't necessarily love it. I love the benefits of it though, because
Yeah,
I tell people, I mean, if you want to be that technical person who is seen as more than just that person in front of their computer that no one understands, well, get better at communicating what you're doing with other people, especially decision makers, because oftentimes those are the people who get the opportunities. And you don't want to be that technical person who's disgruntled at their cubicle because someone else got what you thought you deserved and you just thought that your technical expertise would speak for itself. Well, especially if you're at a big company, a tech company with, hundreds of engineers, if they all thought that way, I mean, how many people would be moving up? Probably not a
yeah,
whole lot. And again, it's just like, well, who do you have to blame, really? I mean, you should have known.
yeah, yeah. It's true.
Yeah, absolutely. So this has been a great conversation, Ken. Thank you so much for being a guest. How can people get in touch with you?
So feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or you feel free to email me at klittle@justworks.com. And yeah, as most folks are out there, we're hiring, so don't be shy. Reach out.
Excellent. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you.